They told him not to stop at that cabin, not because of ghosts or outlaws, but because nobody who lived there ever lasted through a full winter, and yet William Carter pulled the reins of his chestnut horse anyway, the leather creaking softly as the animal settled in the cold morning air, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the crooked shape of a forgotten cabin sitting half a mile off the main trail like something the land itself was trying to swallow, the chimney barely breathing a thin line of gray. Smoke that looked more like a question than a sign of life. And William, a man who owned over 12,000 acres of grazing land and more cattle than most towns could count, felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not pity, not curiosity, something quieter than that, something heavier. The wind carried the dry scent of cedar and old dust as he dismounted, his boots pressing into the hard earth, measuring the place the way a rancher measures everything: fence lines, water levels, storm clouds. But this time he was measuring survival, noticing the sagging porch, the patched roof held down by stones, the woodpile stacked too small for the coming cold season, maybe half a cord at most, not enough to last past December. And winter out here didn't forgive mistakes. He stepped closer, slow, respectful, the way his father taught him when approaching frightened horses or proud men, his hat casting a shadow across his face as he caught movement through the cracked window glass. Just a flicker, a figure shifting inside, someone watching him first. Then the door opened just 3 inches. No more. A woman's voice came through, steady but tired. "You selling something?" William shook his head once. "No, ma'am." Silence followed, stretched thin like wire. "Then you're either lost," she said, "or looking to buy land." William glanced at the dry grass, the boundary stones nearly buried by years of neglect. Maybe just making sure someone out here ain't freezing. The door opened a little wider then, and he saw her properly for the first time. Maybe early 30s, dark hair pulled back rough with a strip of cloth, eyes sharp like someone who had learned the hard way not to trust easy smiles, a Winchester rifle resting easy in her hands, but pointed safely toward the floor. Not a threat, just a statement. "I ain't freezing," she said. William nodded, noticing the careful pride in her posture, the kind that survives long after comfort disappears. "Didn't say you were." Another silence. The wind pushed across the plains, rattling loose boards somewhere along the cabin wall. He noticed details most men would miss: the repaired hinges, the hand-dug drainage trench, the careful stacking of empty flour sacks to block drafts. This wasn't someone waiting to be saved. This was someone refusing to fall. Finally, he reached into his saddlebag and set down a small wrapped bundle on the porch without stepping closer. Coffee, flour, salt, simple things. He tipped his hat slightly. Sometimes neighbors just check on neighbors. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't ask for help." William gave the smallest shrug. "Good thing I didn't ask permission." He turned back toward his horse then, boots crunching against gravel, giving her the dignity of refusal. But as he reached the saddle, he heard the door open fully behind him. "Why?" she asked, not soft, not suspicious, just direct. William paused, one gloved hand resting against worn leather, sunlight catching the silver buckle at his belt. He didn't turn around right away. "Because," he finally said, voice calm as open land, "someone once did the same thing for my family when we had less than nothing." The wind moved between them again. When he finally rode off, he didn't look back. But he didn't need to. For the first time in years, smoke from that chimney rose a little stronger into the wide American sky. The town of Briar Ridge sat 12 miles east of the cabin, a place where every porch had a chair and every chair had an opinion. And by the time William Carter rode his horse down Main Street that afternoon, the news had already outrun him, because nothing traveled faster than curiosity in a town with one barber shop and one church. He tied his horse outside Mercer General Store and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, the planks groaning under his boots, and before he even reached the door, he felt the weight of eyes on his back. Old Man Fletcher stopped rocking his chair. 2 ranch hands went quiet near the water trough. Even the blacksmith paused mid-hammer strike. William pushed the door open anyway. The bell above it rang once, sharp and clear. Inside smelled like coffee beans and lamp oil. Clara Mercer stood behind the counter, arms folded. "You rode west this morning," she said without greeting. William picked up a tin of tobacco, turning it slowly in his hand. "I ride a lot of directions." She did not smile. "Not that direction." A younger man near the window spoke without looking up. Nobody goes past Miller Creek unless they got business. William set the tin down. Maybe I did. Silence fell again, thicker this time. Finally, Clara leaned forward slightly. That woman out there, she said quietly. She is trouble that keeps to herself. Best arrangement everyone has got. William asked, trouble how? Clara answered, the kind that does not leave when pushed. Another voice joined from the back. Sheriff Dalton Reeves stepped from the shadows. Hat low, expression careful. Land dispute, he said. Paperwork kind. Nothing you need to involve yourself in. William nodded once. Paperwork can still freeze somebody in January. The sheriff studied him. You planning to interfere? William met his eyes calmly. No. That answer seemed to relax the room, but only a little. Outside, a wagon rolled past, wheels grinding against dry dirt. The sheriff spoke again. Town tried to buy her out fair. She said no. Bank tried pressure. She said no. Winter will finish the conversation. She keeps refusing. William asked, she got family? Clara shook her head. Not here. William considered that, then asked one more question. She got legal claim? The sheriff hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. Enough to be difficult, he finally said. William gave a small nod as if that settled something private. He bought nothing, said nothing more, just tipped his hat and walked back into the sunlight. As he mounted his horse, Fletcher called from his chair. You cannot save everyone, Carter. William rested one hand on the saddle horn. Never tried to. Then why stop this time? The old man asked. William looked back toward the western horizon where the cabin sat somewhere beyond sight. Because sometimes, he said evenly, a person is not asking to be saved. He paused. Just not to be erased. No one answered that. He rode out of town slow, thoughtful, the kind of quiet ride a man takes when he has already made a decision he has not told anyone about yet. And that night, long after the town lamps went dark, a single candle still burned in William Carter's ranch office while old land records and debt ledgers lay open across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he intended to solve before the first snow ever touched that lonely cabin. William Carter returned 3 days later just after sunrise, the kind of cold morning where frost clung to fence posts and every breath turned visible in the air, his horse moving slow through the pale grass, as if even the animal understood this was not a visit meant to startle anyone. And as the cabin came into view again, he noticed something different immediately. The bundle he had left on the porch was gone, but not carelessly. The empty flour sack had been folded neat and placed on the railing, the coffee tin cleaned and set beside it like a receipt paid in dignity rather than gratitude. He dismounted without calling out this time, boots pressing quiet into the frozen dirt, and before he could knock, the door opened halfway again. She had been watching. She always was. Her eyes studied him like a ledger, measuring intention instead of words. You came back, she said. William gave a small nod. Just passing through. She glanced at the horse. Nobody passes through here by accident. He allowed the corner of his mouth to move just slightly. Maybe I do. A pause followed, long enough to hear the wind slide through the dry grass like distant surf. Then she stepped aside just enough to allow conversation without invitation. The supplies helped, she admitted. I will repay it. William shook his head. Already did. She frowned slightly. I did nothing. His eyes moved toward the stacked wood, now cut more evenly than before. You used it. That is enough. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than any demand would have. People who expected nothing were harder to understand. After a moment she asked, why does a man with polished boots and silver spurs ride out to check on someone the town pretends does not exist? William considered that carefully before answering. Because pretending not to see something does not make it disappear. Her gaze hardened slightly. That town wants this land. William did not deny it. I know. Then you know they will not stop. He rested his gloves across the saddle horn. Neither do some people. That almost drew the smallest sign of approval from her. Almost. A gust of wind pushed her hair loose slightly, and for the first time he noticed the necklace she wore clearly. A small turquoise stone wrapped in old silver, worn smooth by years, the kind of piece made by hand, not by stores. His expression changed just enough to notice. She saw it. Her hand moved instinctively to cover it. Just a trinket, she said. William spoke quietly. That kind of silver work usually comes from a patchy craftsman. Silence fell heavy between them. Not dangerous. Just honest. Finally, she said, "My mother was Apache." William nodded, once like that confirmed something he already suspected. Mine owed her life to one. That made her look at him differently. Not softer, not warmer, just more carefully. From inside the cabin came the faint smell of sage and wood smoke. Evidence of survival. After a moment she asked, "What do they call you?" "William Carter." She repeated it like testing the weight of it. Then after a long hesitation she answered, "Eliza." No last name offered. Not yet. William did not ask. Out here names were given when trust allowed them. As he prepared to leave she spoke once more. "Mr. Carter." He paused. "Yes, ma'am. I am not looking for rescue." He nodded slowly. "Good." She seemed surprised. "Good." He met her eyes level and calm. "Because I am not here to rescue you." A small silence followed. Then he added, "I am just making sure the rules are fair." For the first time something in her expression shifted, not relief, not trust, something closer to recognition, as if she had just realized she was no longer standing alone against the entire horizon. The first Real snow warning came a week later when the wind changed direction and began carrying that sharp northern bite that old ranchers could feel in their bones before the sky ever showed a cloud. And William Carter noticed it while riding his fence line at dawn, his breath turning white in the cold air as he watched a flock of birds cut south across the pale sky. A sign winter was already moving its pieces into place. By noon he had made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind men brag about. The kind a man makes alone with his conscience. His supply wagon rolled out that afternoon carrying lumber, nails, 2 full cords of cedar firewood, and a cast iron stove still wrapped in shipping cloth. His ranch hands asked no questions because William Carter was not a man who explained his choices twice. By late afternoon the wagon stopped half a mile short of the cabin. William finished the rest on horseback. No audience. No witnesses. When he arrived, Eliza was already outside splitting kindling with steady rhythm, the sound of steel on wood echoing across the empty land. She saw the extra horse trailing behind him carrying supplies. Her shoulders stiffened immediately. "No," she said before he even spoke. William rested one hand on the saddle. "Afternoon to you too." Her jaw tightened. "I told you I do not take charity." William nodded calmly. "Good." That answer caught her off guard. "Good," she repeated. "Because this is not charity," he said. She set the axe down, but did not step closer. "Then what is it?" William removed his gloves slowly. "Insurance." That word hung in the air between them. "Insurance for what?" she asked. He glanced at the sky. "For a winter that does not care how proud we are." She shook her head. "Take it back." William did not move. "Cannot." "Why not?" she pressed. He answered simply. "Already paid the freight." Silence again. The wind pushed against the cabin walls with a hollow sound. Finally she asked, quieter now, "What do you want in return?" William looked almost surprised by the question. "Nothing. Nobody gives nothing." He considered that. "Then call it settling an old account." Her eyes narrowed. "I never met you before." William gave a small nod. "Not you." That was all he said. No explanation. No speech. Just truth offered without decoration. She studied him for a long moment, searching for angles, for tricks, for the usual hooks people hid behind kindness. She found none. Finally, she pointed to the stacked wood. "You can leave the stove. I will buy the rest from you come spring." William accepted that with a nod. "Fair enough." As he began unloading the stove himself, she surprised him by helping, silent, efficient, refusing to be a bystander in her own survival. When it was set inside the cabin, she ran her hand lightly across the iron surface, not like someone receiving a gift, but like someone accepting a tool. At the doorway she said one more thing. "Mr. Carter." He stopped. "Yes, ma'am." "If this is a debt," she said carefully, "then someday I will know why." William rested his hat back on his head. "Maybe," he answered. Then after a pause he added, "Or maybe it is enough that the world stays balanced." As he rode away, the new stovepipe caught the last light of the setting sun, and for the first time that cabin did not look forgotten. It looked claimed. The first real storm did not arrive with thunder or drama. It came the way winter usually does on the frontier, quiet and certain, the temperature dropping 15 degrees overnight, water troughs freezing solid by morning, and the sky turning the pale color that old cattlemen called warning glass. And William Carter knew before anyone said a word that Briar Ridge would soon begin applying pressure again because cold weather made land more valuable and lonely people easier to move. 3 days later, his prediction proved right. A buckboard wagon appeared near Eliza's boundary markers just after noon, carrying 2 men in town coats too clean for ranch work and a third man holding a leather document case like it contained authority. William was not there. Eliza faced them alone. She stood on her porch, hands calm at her sides, the new stovepipe breathing a thin, steady trail of smoke behind her like quiet proof she intended to stay. The tallest man spoke first. "Miss Eliza Whitmore," he said, reading carefully from his notes. "We represent Briar Ridge Development and Agricultural Holdings." She did not move. That sounds like a long name for men who want something that is not theirs. The second man forced a polite smile. "We are offering a generous purchase agreement. Above market value. Cash." She asked one question. "Why?" They exchanged a look. Finally, the first answered. "Because this land sits between 2 planned grazing expansions." She gave a small nod. "Then it must be worth more than what you are offering." The man tried again. "You are one woman facing a hard winter." Eliza answered evenly. "I have faced worse seasons than weather." That ended the friendly tone. The document case opened. Papers came out. Numbers were mentioned. Deadlines suggested. She listened without interruption. When they finished, she gave her answer. "No. Just that. No anger. No fear. Just final." The third man sighed like someone used to easier victories. "The bank may not be as patient." Eliza replied. "The bank can speak to me directly." What she did not know was that earlier that same morning, 60 miles away, William Carter had already ridden into the regional bank office and purchased every outstanding note tied to her property, every lien, every seasonal credit extension, every quiet financial rope the town believed they held. And he did it without announcement, without sending word, signing only one instruction across the final document. "Do not disclose purchaser." Back at the cabin, the men gathered their papers, confidence slightly shaken by her refusal to bend. "You may reconsider," one said. Eliza stepped back toward her door. "I rarely do." They left with the look of men who expected time to do their work for them. That evening, William rode past the ridge above her cabin, but did not approach, just watching from a distance as the new stove's smoke rose steady into the darkening sky. He checked the repaired roofline, the stacked cedar, the boundary stones still undisturbed. A quiet satisfaction settled over him, not pride, something simpler. Balance. As he turned his horse back toward the long trail home, he spoke only once into the empty wind. Debt is debt. No one heard him, and that was exactly how he intended it. Winter settled over the plains in a way that made every ridge and hollow more defined. The early morning sunlight cutting across the frost-covered land, turning each blade of grass into a tiny crystal, and William Carter rode slowly along the edge of his property, feeling the cold settle in his bones but not in his purpose, because this was not a ride for leisure, nor for inspection, but for observation. To see the results of a quiet act that had grown into something almost alive, something he could not quite measure yet. As he reached the ridge overlooking Eliza's cabin, he noticed the chimney smoke rising steady, unbroken, not wavering as it had before, a sign that the cabin was warm, the stove in use, the place being cared for by its inhabitant. He watched her move outside, gathering water from the frozen creek with careful balance, her movements economical but confident, each step measured, the way someone accustomed to solitude adapts to the environment without complaint. She turned, her head slightly, sensing him without needing to look directly, acknowledging his presence with a quiet nod, and for a moment he wondered if she realized just how much the small bundle he had left weeks ago had altered her routine, her ability to prepare for the coming months without fear of shortages. William noticed details now that he had not before. The repaired fence posts, the neatly stacked wood that had once been scattered, the small garden bed now protected by makeshift barriers against wind and snow, all evidence of her pride and resilience, not dependence. As he rode down closer, he spoke quietly, so as not to startle her. "Cabin holding up well." She smiled slightly, a small curve that did not reach her eyes fully but conveyed acknowledgement. "Better than I expected," she answered, voice steady, not needing embellishment. "The stove helps." He nodded. "Winter will not be so cruel then." She glanced at the horizon, the vast stretch of plains stretching pale under the sun, and said, "It never was cruel, only indifferent." William appreciated that honesty. "Then you are prepared," he said, more statement than question. She returned to her work without comment, but he observed the careful way she sorted firewood by size and density, the way she checked the water pail for cracks, the meticulousness of a person who had learned to care for what little she had. He lingered a moment longer, letting the wind carry the distance between them without bridging it unnecessarily. The balance he had sought was evident here, in the quiet efficiency of survival, in the dignity of work done without boast or complaint, and he knew that the actions he had taken had shifted the cabin from a place of simple endurance to one of quiet strength, a home prepared for winter and for whatever the land might ask next. Without another word, William mounted his horse and began the slow ride back toward his own property, watching the sun catch the smoke in gold and gray, and he felt a calm certainty settle over him that some debts, when paid with respect rather than expectation, carried a reward invisible to the world but heavy in the life it preserved. The wind shifted that morning, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and the distant warmth of the sun rising over the eastern hills, and William Carter rode slowly along the ridge overlooking Eliza's cabin, noting how the frost sparkled like scattered diamonds across the prairie, each blade of grass etched in light and shadow, the quiet interrupted only by the soft jingle of his horse's harness and the occasional distant caw of a crow. He did not hurry. The air was crisp, and the horizon stretched for miles without interruption, a reminder that nothing moved faster than intention when measured against patience. Eliza appeared on the porch, carrying a bucket of water and stacking the frozen pails neatly beside the woodpile, her posture upright, controlled, her gaze brief but steady as she caught sight of him. William tipped his hat slowly, acknowledgement enough, and he could see in the way she handled the simple chores that she understood the weight of survival without needing guidance. He pulled his horse closer, stopping short of the walkway, letting the snow crunch under his boots, a rhythm that matched the quiet pulse of the plains. "Cabin holding?" he asked quietly, voice low to avoid startling the echoing air. She paused only a moment, then nodded. "Better than I feared," she said, hands still wet from the water. William observed the small improvements since his last visit. A new corner post secured, the roof patched more carefully, a modest windbreak against the northern gales, evidence of her determination to preserve the space that had become both home and statement. "Winter coming strong," he said, not as warning but as statement. She glanced at the sky, thin streaks of cloud catching the morning light. "It always does." He let that pass, allowing the words to float between them. Then he moved quietly toward the stacked firewood, inspecting the rows of cut cedar, appreciating the care she had taken, the precision of each placement. "You do good work," he said softly. She did not respond immediately, only measured him with eyes that had learned to see both caution and intent. "It is what must be done," she said finally, her voice even, almost a rhythm, a quiet testament to the way she approached life. William nodded once, understanding more than she realized, and from his saddlebag he produced a small wrapped bundle, dried herbs, extra blankets, and a coil of rope, items simple, practical, almost ceremonial in their intent. She looked at him, eyes narrowing with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I do not ask for gifts," she said, voice firm. "Nor do I ask for recognition," he replied. "Then what?" she pressed, steady now. "A balance," he said simply. "A world that moves fair where it can and respects those who stay steady." She regarded him, taking in the measure of his words and his quiet presence, and for the first time, he noticed a shift in her posture, subtle, almost imperceptible, as though the weight of the season, the land, and her own choices had settled into a kind of understanding. He stayed a few more moments, allowing the wind to carry the conversation without speaking further, and then mounted his horse, pausing to glance once more at the cabin, the smoke rising straight and unwavering into the cold morning air, and he rode back along the ridge, knowing that silent assurance had sometimes more power than spoken promise, and that a balance maintained in quiet vigilance could outlast the harshest winter. Spring arrived quietly over the plains, the snow retreating to the edges of the hills and the creek running clear and swift again, carrying the cold winter melt toward distant valleys, and William Carter rode along his familiar trail, noticing the subtle changes in the land as frost receded, the earth softening under the hooves of his horse, and the first crocus flowers daring to peek through the thawed soil. delicate purple and yellow amid the pale green of the prairie grass, signs of life. Returning to a land long held in the quiet grip of winter. As he approached Eliza's cabin, he saw her working outside, tending a small garden patch protected by the windbreak he had helped construct months earlier, her movements deliberate and calm, every action purposeful, the way someone who has weathered harsh seasons learns to measure effort and conserve energy. She looked up briefly as he neared, eyes meeting his across the yard with that same steady awareness, neither surprise nor expectation, only acknowledgement of a presence familiar without need for words. William dismounted and walked slowly toward the cabin, boots pressing into the softened earth, the sound muted under the thawing soil. He carried nothing with him this time, only his own quiet attention, and that alone seemed to be enough for the moment. "The garden is thriving," he said softly, noticing the orderly rows of early vegetables and the protective fencing, a testament to her care and diligence. She inclined her head. "It is small, but it will feed me through summer." He nodded, considering the simplicity and the strength required to maintain it through winter, the practical elegance of her survival. For a while they worked in companionable silence, him clearing a few scattered stones from the path while she tended the soil, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and cedar smoke from the stove inside the cabin, a combination that spoke of life and resilience. When the morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the yard, she paused and wiped her hands, looking out toward the distant hills. "I have managed on my own for many seasons," she said, voice steady but not defensive. "Yes," William replied. "But sometimes even the strongest among us benefit from a steady hand beside them, not to take over, but to balance the work." She studied him for a long moment, the faintest curve of acknowledgement appearing in her expression, a subtle recognition that he understood something essential without needing to intrude or command. Then she turned back to the garden, resuming her careful tending, and he stepped back, giving her space, letting her independence remain intact. William mounted his horse slowly, taking in the view of the cabin framed by the early spring landscape, the smoke from the stove rising straight and certain into the clear air, a symbol of continued life and quiet triumph. He rode back along the ridge with the sun warming the cold ground beneath him, the prairie stretching endless and open, and in the silence between the rolling hills he felt the satisfaction that comes from knowing a balance had been maintained, a debt quietly honored, and a life strengthened without fanfare or announcement, a proof that the smallest acts of consideration could ripple outward and shape more than just a single season. Summer arrived quietly, stretching warm light across the plains and softening the edges of the frost that lingered in shaded hollows, and William Carter rode slowly along the trail toward Eliza's cabin, the grass tall now and scented with fresh growth, the creek running steady and clear, reflecting the high sun as if the land itself had opened a mirror for the day, and he noted every detail, the way the wind carried the hum of insects and the occasional bird call across the open expanse, the distant hills rolling with a gentle rhythm that mirrored his own measured pace. As he crested the last ridge, the cabin came into view, the smoke rising straight and unwavering, the wood stacked neatly against the walls, and the small garden thriving under Eliza's careful tending, rows of green stretching between low fences, a patchwork of resilience and patient effort. She was outside, arranging fresh water from the creek into a wooden trough for the animals she had quietly acquired, a few chickens moving between her boots, pecking at seeds she scattered with practiced precision. Their eyes met briefly as he approached, a recognition passing between them that required no words, the kind of understanding earned over long winters and small acts of consistency. William dismounted and walked toward the cabin, boots pressing softly into the warmed earth, noticing how she had repaired the windbreak with the last of the cedar he had delivered months before, the structure now solid and protective against the occasional summer storms. "Everything thriving?" he asked, voice calm, carrying easily across the sunlit yard. She nodded, brushing her hands on her apron. "It is more than I hoped. The garden, the animals, even the cabin holds steady now." He observed her carefully, the quiet strength in her stance, the precision of her movements, and he felt a deep satisfaction, not from control or oversight, but from witnessing the result of patience and mutual respect. A small breeze lifted the edge of the roof, carrying with it the faint smell of sage and earth, and he could see her take a moment to inhale it, a ritual unspoken but meaningful. Winter will come again, he said, almost to himself, and it will be harsh. She glanced toward the horizon where the prairie spread endlessly, the sun catching the distant ridges. Then we will meet it as we did before, she replied, steady and composed, the authority in her tone born from experience, not arrogance. William tipped his hat, acknowledging the balance now achieved, the mutual respect unspoken but clear, and turned back toward the ridge, letting his horse move with deliberate calm, the sunlight casting long shadows behind them, the cabin standing resolute below, a testament to endurance, quiet courage, and lives intertwined by unannounced acts of care. As he rode away, he did not look back. Yet the image of the cabin, smoke rising steady into the warm summer sky, lingered, a proof that some debts, paid without expectation, carried their own lasting reward, and that in the quiet vastness of the plains, dignity and trust could transform a life more completely than any other gesture could.